are going to use this idea of Mother May I and Simon Says to explore the permission that we need to do our spiritual growth journey. Because sometimes our traditions are so strong and the tapes in our head are so loud that we believe that we cannot step outside the traditions that we have been given. The traditions not just from our parents and our society, but the traditions that we have built our identities upon. I grew up in the Southern Baptist Church, and when my sexual orientation became apparent and at odds with what the Southern Baptist Church taught, I needed some permission to go out and make this search, make my own journey. And we're going to talk about that. I'm going to tell you a little story about that as we go through. But I just want you to know there is a big difference between Simon Says and Mother May I. And that's what we're going to explore this morning. And when we understand the difference and we can live into that Mother May I form of permission, that's when we all get to say, oh yeah. As a child, I was never good at playing Simon Says. I would inevitably make some illegal move and be tossed unceremoniously from the game, but it always made me wonder, who is this Simon guy? And how did he get all the power to boss me around anyway? I was always more partial to the game of Mother May I. At least in that game, you only got sent back to the beginning if you made a mistake, and it was clear where Mother's authority came from. And this has been the story of my own spiritual growth, struggle, and learning. I've always been skeptical of the theological Simons who continuously tell me what I must do to have a relationship with God. Years ago, as I struggled reconciling my sexual orientation and spirituality, I ran into a lot of Simons, especially in the Christian church. My sexual orientation was enough. They didn't need to know anything about anything else. You just stop at that, and they just toss you right out from the institution, especially since I was unrepentant. I was an admitted, practicing homosexual. Of course, I don't know that I need to practice too much anymore. Getting pretty good at it. I think I might turn pro. Right. Well, they took my butch card, so, yeah. And what?
You still have your toaster.
I still have my toaster oven. So, yeah.
Now we're dating ourselves.
That's right. Now we're really dating ourselves. I still have my comfortable shoes. Right. That's a lesbian, a woman in comfortable shoes. But my temerity at questioning that Simon's right to reject me from the faith made them even louder. It made them more forceful in asserting their right to do so as the defenders of the orthodoxy. So who are these Simons? Where do they get the power to say who's in and who's out with God? So yeah, I like to take my commands from Mother, from God, from the universe, from the holy, however you might imagine it. Because the holy's authority, it's clear, it's unambiguous. Why do I need all these Simons around me telling me what to do when my Mother, my Creator, is the only source of authority that I will ever need? So in my mind, the game of Simon Says represents our mediated experience of God through a church or some other outside authority, while Mother May I represents our unmediated relationship with the holy. In today's Jesus story, we see him advancing this idea of a Mother May I relationship with God, because he says God's realm isn't out here anywhere. It is within. It's within us all. The Simons of this world, they're the ones who are pointing to things outside and saying, well, there's God's realm over there. The church, that's God's realm. These religions and doctrines and dogmas, that's where you can find God's realm. Witness the uproar recently about a Catholic priest whose improper use of a pronoun has invalidated the baptism of hundreds of people. Now that is a Simon move if I ever saw one. Thou shalt not be baptized. Because somebody got a word wrong. Are you kidding me? Yeah. Okay. Permission, though, plays a huge role in our spiritual journey. Without some manner of permission, We can remain frozen in our faith or abandon it altogether when questions begin to arise in our minds about our beliefs. Because the Simons in the world are only going to grant you permission to ask approved questions that can be answered in pat theological answers. The mother within us, though, grants us permission to ask any question that arises for us, as long as we just follow that divine intuition toward the answer. Mother, may I ask this question? And Mother says, yes. Ask all the questions you need. The truth of the matter is, permission begins inside as Spirit raises those questions within us. But often, our first forms of permission, sometimes they necessarily have to come from outside of us, through benevolent authorities that we believe in who can guide us down the right path. My own personal outside permission came in the form of a book. It was called The Christian Agnostic by a man named Leslie Weatherhead. A friend of mine had mentioned this book to me as I began the journey of reconciling my sexuality and spirituality, and I had a mystical incident that brought this book into my hands. When I first started looking for it, it was out of print. And this was in the 90s. We didn't have Amazon yet. We didn't have all this online resources where you could find out-of-print books. So I'm like, I despaired. I'm never going to find this book. And one day, I had this voice in my head that said, go to the bookstore. And usually I'm just like, yes, on it, let's go. Bookstore, take me there. But this day I was like, no, I don't want to go to the bookstore. And the voice just got louder and more insistent. And I'm like, fine, I'll go to the bookstore. I went to the bookstore. It's a beautiful bookstore. It's a great used bookstore in Atlanta. I don't think it's there anymore. But it was near Emory, so it had a really rich theological section where all the Candler students would drop off their theology books. It was great. So I was irritated, though. I walked into the bookstore. I'm like, walking to the theology section. Okay, fine. I'm looking. There's not even, it's not there. It is not here. It's not here. What is going on? I'm wasting my time. There wasn't even anything good on the shelf that I could just take with me and, pacify myself and go, well, I didn't waste that trip. There was nothing. So I'm mad now. So I'm stomping down. I don't even know where I'm at. I walk down this aisle I've never been down. It's a fiction section, and I don't read fiction, and I've never been down this aisle, and I am pissed. And I look, and I stop, and there on top of a bunch of other books that are just kind of on top of these other books is a hardback first edition of The Christian Agnostic.
And the Holy said, ha!
And the Holy went, gotcha. It was in the fiction section. It was in a section that I had never been in, because I just go to the theology section and I pick things up and I buy them. I've never been down this aisle. But this book is amazing. In the preface, I didn't have to get far into this book. I was offered a tool that gave me the permission I needed to play Mother May I instead of Simon Says and seek my own relationship with God. Weatherhead wrote that if you have questions about any church doctrine or dogma, such as the virgin birth or a literal bodily resurrection, which were a couple of things that were tripping me up, he says, create a mental box for yourself and label it in your mind, awaiting further light. This is a way of asking, not the Simons outside of you, but your mother within, to guide you toward the answer you need to take those steps forward on your spiritual journey, home to your divine mother. So as you await further light, Weatherhead says, we don't become passive. Instead, he writes, we join with others in trying to show and to spread Christ's Spirit, for this we feel is the most important thing in the world. In other words, as you put those doubts and fears into your awaiting further light box, while waiting that permission from Mother to go deeper in your spiritual growth, you are invited to be actively shining your light of love in the world, even as you are working on yourself. Even as you search for that deeper relationship with the Holy, you are always jubilance, always granted permission to shine. Breathe deeply. Not all of us, though, want permission. Many of us see that as just inviting trouble. My mother, when I told her all those years ago that I was going to seminary, looked up from her tomato plants long enough to say, "Why do you want to go and mess yourself up like that?" Questions, she said, are the devil's playground, and you will shipwreck your faith. And she was right. I did. I shipwrecked the faith that had been handed to me by all those Simons in the church, and it was a good shipwreck. It was beautiful, best one ever. While my biological mother wasn't thrilled with my decision and would, like a true Simon, have forbade me from doing it if she could have, my inner mother had already granted me my request to take those steps forward. And that doesn't mean the transformation I underwent was all puppies and unicorns. I mean, it wasn't. It was really difficult in seminary to unlearn everything I had known and begin the journey of remembering who I really am, that light of the world that has never left its source. It's understandable that it's sometimes easier to trust the Simons who can just give us those simple theological answers instead of asking the questions that only our inner mother's permission can move us to explore. As our reading from A Course in Miracles says, many stand guard over their ideas because they want to protect their thought systems as they are, and learning means change. Change is always fearful to the separated, it says, because they cannot conceive of it as a move towards healing the separation. They always perceive it as a move toward further separation because the separation was their first experience of change. You believe, it says, that if you allow no change to enter into your ego, you will find peace. And that's exactly what my birth mother, my outer mother out here, believed. If questions are the devil's playground, well, it's better to just stay where you are, keep the peace that you think you have found, and keep following Simon's rules. Because that's the only peace you've ever known. You don't know there's a better peace on the other side of all those Simons. The word permission, though, it comes to us from the Latin permittere, which means to let through. When we grant permission to ourselves, it is not permission to walk away from something. It is not permission for spiritual bypass. It is not permission to not face our fears or our pain. Instead, permission is what we have to go through something. Seeking an understanding of our higher divine self is something we must go through, and it is not an easy task. In my own journey, I found plenty of Simons who told me that women were not permitted to speak in the church. They weren't permitted. They didn't have permission to speak in the church or to teach or, heaven forbid, preach. Woo. And yet, I persisted. And forget about leadership roles. If you are LGBTQ, oh my goodness, even getting into the building can be hard, but you can forget about being in leadership until you give up your filthy lifestyle. I'm like, you've seen my house? Damn. Oops. To exercise the permission that our mother has given us, though, we must overcome these obstacles. To do that, we got to go through them. There's no way around. We got to wrestle with the questions that are put to us by the Simons who seek to deny our permission. And we must always remember, however, that true permission comes from that mother that is not affected by anything that the Simons have to say about it. What our inner mother offers us is something Joseph Sharp calls that grand permission, a slightly maverick, outrageous, or even for some heretical depth of permission, which he says takes a determination to follow our higher divine self. If we undertake this grand permission, it results in our ultimate liberation from all of the Simons out here that seek to control us. Because these Simons are, of course, just our ego. It's just ego in all of its different disguises, which is afraid that if we follow our permission and our inner mother, if we follow change toward unity and away from separation, its power over us ends. And it's doing everything it can to keep that from happening. Learning, A Course in Miracles says, is ultimately perceived as frightening because it leads to the relinquishment, Not the destruction, we're not trying to kill it, but the relinquishment of the ego to the light of spirit. Relinquishing the ego means it has no true power over us. It is cast out of the driver's seat in our lives and put in its proper place. It's either in the back seat or perhaps tied up in the trunk now and then when it really gets going on its fear voice. It's that's when you tie the ego up, you stick it in the trunk. It's okay. Just not in the driver's seat. So this begs the question, Jubilants, where do you need this morning some grand permission in your current spiritual journey? Where are you still obediently and blindly following the Simons of the world, unconsciously accepting your ego's word as the ultimate truth? Where, Jubilants, are you still clinging to the ego's false sense of peace, afraid to ask those questions and follow your mother's inner path that will last and find that true joy and peace? I invite you this morning to seek that grand permission that Sharp describes. It's not arrogant, he says. It's not uninformed or unaware. Instead, it allows us to face challenges that makes us rethink and reconsider and reimagine our relationship with ourselves, our relationships with those around us, and ultimately our relationship with the holy. And when we move with the inner mother's urging and permission, we move away from our feelings of separation that the Simons like to foster in this world. Grand permission offers us the path toward our unity, where we ultimately find that love, peace, and joy that passes all of the ego's understanding. So I invite you this week, Jubilants, closely examine the voices that you are following. Are they Simons telling us how we should think in this world? Or are we following the voice of our divine mother that urges us to ask questions that will put us firmly outside of our comfort zone so we can go deeper within our divinity and find our final liberation from the stifling Simons that seek to keep us under control? As a first step, I invite you to take Alanis Morissette's advice and just give yourself permission to be, permission to slow down and do the things that matter the most to you. Not the things you should be doing, but the things that you feel called to be doing. And if you do that, I think you'll find the words of A Course will ring true. Teaching and learning are your greatest strengths now, it says, because they enable you to change your mind and help others change theirs. Jubilants, you have a grand permission to be, to go slow, to change your mind, and in the process become the source of permission and liberation for everyone who comes in contact with you. And when you do that, the whole world gets permission to say, oh yeah.